Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the On Centerline podcast. I am your host, Sam Terrell, the Northwest Aeronaut on YouTube. Thank you for joining me. Last week, we discussed 5 tips for instrument students, but I didn't want to leave you primary students just hanging out to dry. So today, we're going to discuss 5 tips for student pilots or private students that will ensure your training and overall flying careers will be set up for success going forward. Now, there are a lot of videos out there with tips for student pilots about how to make the most of your training and mistakes to avoid and all that. Today, I'm going to be focusing specifically on 5 things that have to do with the actual flying of the plane. These are things I do with my own students regularly and hope that these tips will be just as useful for you. And for those of you who listen until the end, there may even be a bonus tip. So with that, let's get started. All right, tip number 1, cover the instrument panel. Now, I do this from day 1 typically with my students. I'm covering, if not the whole thing, at the very least, everything except the airspeed indicator. All right. Now, I do this with a microfiber cloth, typically, something that can just be draped over the panel and can easily be lifted up so that they can check things as they need to. But realistically, for the first flight, 2, 3, 4, for the first few flights especially, we don't need them to be concerned with the majority of the things on that panel. Airspeed, sure, that's great. And it's important to correlate what they see out the window with the performance they get out of the airspeed indicator. But what happens so often is whether, instructors do something to encourage this or not, even accidentally, people just get sucked into that panel. There's just so many pretty dials, especially if they're in a glass cockpit. Things are looking, we're so used to looking at screens these days with phones and iPads and computers. Your eyes just gravitate towards those screens. We want to be looking outside, and so many students don't learn how to actually fly the plane through visual references. So cover up the instrument panel. Get used to what the sight pictures look like for any given phase of flight, any given maneuver that you do, and then you can just check in on the panel to see if things like your airspeed and altitude are exactly what you want them to be. I think what you're going to usually come to find, though, is that especially once you get some experience, and this is what I do with more advanced students like commercial or CFI candidates, I'll cover up the panel for them. They'll freak out initially. I'll say, just fly the plane like you know how to do. And through whatever maneuver, through whatever they're doing, they'll fly the plane without the panel, and I will lift the rag at the end. They'll look down to see, usually, pretty close to perfect airspeed and altitude. And it's all because they actually know how to fly the plane better than they think they do. They're just so insecure about trying to do it without the use of being able to just look at those instruments all the time. Now, of course, these are instincts and skills that come along with practice and experience, so I don't expect any initial students out there to be able to do that off the bat. But the more you start doing it from the start, being able to fly the plane based on what you see out the window and even to an extent what you hear with, the engine sounds and the sounds of the wind over the airframe, the more you will gain that intuitive sense of what the airplane is doing at any given time. All right, so cover up that instrument panel. Keep those eyes outside. Number 2, trim. You must learn and utilize that trim wheel or handle. And we don't just want to trim. We want to make sure we're trimming properly. Trim should always be, we talk about basically from any phase of flight to another. Okay, any transition, we use the PPT, the pitch power trim. Trim needs to always be the last thing we do after we've set the pitch and the power settings we want for the given phase of flight we're in. When we do trim, so I teach my students, I hate what I call the wigga technique, okay? If you ever have been in a Cessna with a rusty kind of trim wheel that needs a little bit of oil, oftentimes you'll turn it and it'll squeak. It'll go, wick up, wick up, wick up, wick up. So I call it the wigga technique because they just do little tiny turns and you hear the trim wheel going, wick up, wick up, wick up, wick up, wick up, wick up, wick up. And the problem with that is you have no idea how much trim you're actually putting into the plane. Okay? Now, yes, you can still feel the control pressures change as you do it, but from an objective standpoint, you have no idea how much you just trimmed, which means that later, if you need to go back to the phase of flight you just came out of, you're going to have to guess with the trim again. Rather than, just as an example, let's say we go from a VY climb into cruise flight. Typically, it's going to require 1 full turn or sometimes 1.5 full turns of nose down trim to level off into level flight. And if you know that for your plane, let's just say it requires 1 full turn of trim nose down, well, then 5, 10, whatever minutes later, when you have to climb again, you want to get back into that VY climb. Well, all you have to do is put the power back in full, raise the nose, and do the 1 full turn of trim nose up this time. All right, so knowing exactly how much trim it takes to change from one configuration to another is going to make your life so much easier, especially when you do get to instrument training, and it's going to make your flying much more efficient overall. So, trim for all phases of flight and know how much trim you're doing. Use full turns, okay? You do full turns, maybe you do 2 full turns. If that's too much, you take a half turn out, okay? And that way you learn exactly how much trim is needed for a configuration change from one phase to the next. All right, number 3, practice the fundamentals. Guys, hopefully you're being taught the fundamentals, but how often are you practicing the fundamentals? And these are things like coordination exercises, okay? Dutch rolls are something I do with all my students, learning how to properly coordinate a roll into a turn, okay, through use of aileron and rudder. Being able to just rock the wings back and forth with the nose pegged on a single point out the window without the nose swinging back and forth due to adverse yaw. Okay, that's an exercise that I do a lot, and it's something that you can do just anytime, even when you're climbing out of the airport, when you're climbing and you're trying to just get up to altitude for maneuvers, or if you're just en route on a cross country doing nothing, you can sit there and do some Dutch rolls and just practice rolling the airplane back and forth and coordinating that with the rudder. Okay. A easier version of this is just to do little S turns where you put in 20 to 30 degrees of bank one direction with a properly coordinated roll into the turn. Let it turn at that bank just for, 20, 30 degrees, and then stop that turn, roll out of it, and come the other way. And just do these little S turns, but making sure that every time we roll into a new direction, that nose is stopping and pivoting on a single point out the window. The nose isn't continuing to slide in the direction we were just turning, because that would indicate adverse yaw and lack of proper rudder coordination. So, practice coordination exercises. I've got videos on those. You can check out Shapes in the Sky. I'll try to put the flag here for that video if you're watching on YouTube. Practice these things in all different phases, slow flight, cruise, etc., because it gets you a better understanding of how the controls feel and how effective they are in these different phases, okay? All right, guys, number 4, implement SOPs. Hopefully you guys are familiar with the term SOPs. If you're not, it stands for Standard Operating Procedures. Okay, as I say to my students, we need to be doing the same thing, the same way, every single time. That is a standard operating procedure. And by doing that, through use of things like flows, and of course, back those flows up with checklists, and having trigger items being, hey, when this happens, I do this. An example of that would be, one thing I teach is when we make our 10-mile call to the airport, 65813, 10 miles south, inbound 02, when we do that 10-mile call, that's the first time that we run our GUMPS checklist, our pre-landing checklist, okay? It's not even that you're necessarily going to be doing all, maybe not even any of the items on that checklist just yet, depending on the plane you're in. But it starts getting you in the mindset of, hey, we are coming into land here shortly. I need to be thinking about these things. So 10-mile call, we do our GUMPS checklist the first time, or GUMPS flow rather, okay? Same thing for the 5-mile call. We do our 5-mile call, we do our GUMPS, okay? And then the last time when we enter the downwind for the pattern, that would be an example of a trigger item. This happens, I do this, okay? Standard operating procedures when it comes to after landing checklists. After landing, we get off the runway completely. We make a call as appropriate to the traffic, or if we're at a towered airport, we'll contact ground. But we stop the airplane and we run our question mark flow. I teach a question mark flow. Some people call it door to the floor. But we're going to check our lights. We're going to check our carb heat, turn that off. We're going to lean our mixture for taxi. We're going to put our flaps up, and we're going to reset our trim for takeoff. And we do it in that order, in that flow, every single time, okay? Standard operating procedures will not only keep you safe and prevent you from forgetting things, especially when they're backed up with the proper checklists, but they will make you a much more efficient and professional pilot. All right? SOPs, guys. And finally, number 5. My 5th tip for you initial private student pilots: practice slow flight down the runway. I have videos on this, and there's other people who have videos on it out there as well. But if you haven't done slow flight down the runway, you know, landing in general tends to be the hardest thing for student pilots to learn. Part of that is the fact that landing tends to somehow get categorized in our mind, or in the way we approach it, as being different from anything else we do in the plane. I hear people say, oh, man, I'm so good. You know, I can do steep turns. I can do stalls. I can do slow flight. I perform them perfectly. I do them to check ride standards, but I just can't learn to land. And I admit I never say this to them because it's not what they're looking to hear. But I'm gonna say it to all of you out there right now, because if that sounds familiar to you, I'm gonna give you a little bit of bad news, but you're flying just as well when you are out in the practice area doing those maneuvers as you do when you are trying to land. If you are having trouble landing, if you cannot hold the proper heading to the runway, if you can't keep your airspeeds under control or anything like that, you're having the same problems doing everything else out in the practice area. Typically, the reason why it doesn't seem that way is because when we're high up, we don't have the same references to the ground, being able to see how far off heading or track we're getting, or how our airspeed's changing necessarily, as we do when we're low over the ground. Okay, we don't see the consequence of being 10 knots too fast when we're just flying around in slow flight in the practice area. But when we come into land and we're 10 knots too fast, we hit that ground effect. We're floating 1,000 feet down the runway. Okay, so if you ever told yourself, oh man, I'm so good at flying everywhere else, I just can't land, I hate to break it to you, but you're not. You are not any better at flying anywhere else as you are when you're landing. It's just that landing and being close to the ground is exposing your weaknesses. So, what's the takeaway from that? The takeaway is, number 1, landings should not be treated or approached any differently than anything else we do in the airplane. Because landing is not, I hate the term you've heard me say in the past, I call them earth connections. Okay, earth connections, because all we're doing is flying the airplane, except we're just flying the airplane so low to the earth that our wheels happen to connect to the earth. And if you think of it that way, if you think of, oh, I'm not going to land, I'm just going to fly my airplane low enough to where my wheels connect with the earth, it creates a shift in how we think and approach it, and oftentimes can make things a little bit easier. So when it comes to slow flight down the runway, we want to practice slow flight by flying as close to the ground as we can, but not letting our wheels touch the ground. You fly straight down the runway center line. It will help you get used to what it looks like to be over the center line. It'll help you get used to what it looks like to be close to the ground and how high above the ground we kind of need to be, or where our sight picture is when our wheels are almost touching the ground. Okay. Ideally, you're finding a nice long runway to do this on. And the best part is that you do this, you fly down along the center line of the runway, and it ends with a go around. And go arounds are something that don't get practiced enough as it is either. So this gives you the opportunity to kind of kill two birds with one stone there. And eventually, you're just going to be doing slow flight down the runway, and maybe your instructor will just tell you, hey, just ease the power out, but don't let the wheels touch. Just ease the power out. And your wheels are going to just butter themselves right onto that pavement. You're going to have the best landing you've ever had. Okay, and that's how I teach my primary students to land, is actually to try not to land. Okay, so practice slow flight down the runway. Hey guys, if you're still hanging out with me right now and listening to this, I really appreciate it. If you could hit that like button and subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. If you are out there in podcast land, hit that follow button. I really appreciate it. And as a thank you for sticking around, I've got one more bonus tip for you. This is number 6. And this bonus tip is not necessarily in relation to flying the aircraft, although it certainly can be. But this tip is learn as much as you possibly can about aircraft systems. Aircraft systems are one of the largest knowledge deficits, not only for private pilots, but for pilots at all levels. I admit that even coming into my CFI check ride, however many years ago it's been now, I was probably weakest, and I got called out a little bit. She's very nice about it, but I got called out a little bit about not being fully up to speed on my aircraft systems and not having a full understanding about it. So, of course, that's something I push with my students all the time these days. But the more proficient and knowledgeable you can be about the aircraft systems, number one, it's just great information to have, and it's going to make you a much safer pilot. You're going to have a better understanding of what the aircraft's doing and why it's doing it. It's going to allow you to do things like start the engine better. How many of you guys have tried to start the engine and you're cranking and cranking and cranking and it's not starting, and maybe it just tries to start and then it doesn't, and you're cranking the starter for 20, 30 seconds, trying multiple times, priming and pumping the throttle and doing all these things, finally maybe getting it started, and then you get a big backfire. That's not healthy for the engine, one thing. And it's also not the sign of a professional pilot who knows what they're doing. So if you don't want to have problems starting an engine, you probably should learn about, hey, what does it take? What is the engine looking for to start? What things do I need to be aware of to know what this engine needs right now in order to start most efficiently? Okay, that's just one thing. Beyond that, if you ever have any abnormal or emergency situation, whether it's an engine failure, whether it's a high voltage warning, a low voltage warning, whatever it is, knowing your systems inside and out is going to give you the tools to properly troubleshoot that issue and make good decisions about whatever's happening, okay? So, learn the aircraft systems, guys. I cannot stress it enough. It's going to give you much better understanding and make you safer, and it's going to give you more confidence when you're out there flying around, especially when you're solo, because you know that you're going to be able to handle a lot more things if they go wrong or if they don't go as planned. All right. Well, that will about do it for today, folks. Again, if this has been helpful for you, I sure would appreciate it if you could share it with anyone else you think would find it helpful. Be sure to like and subscribe if you're here on YouTube. Follow the show if you're listening out there in podcast land, so the next episode will be downloaded automatically for you, free of charge. I really appreciate you spending time with me today, and we will see you next time on Centerline.